And the first one is vital, it's central, isn't it? Because all the others flow from that one. You shall have no other gods before me. We saw last week, God says the whole earth is his. There are to be no other false contenders to take his place. He is the one and only true God. So what follows is there's to be no image made, nothing else to be worshipped or bowed down to. Now, of course, we don't have those idols of wood or stone that would have been talked about in those days. We do have lots of other gods, though, don't we? Gods of pleasure and possessions, social position, money. Sadly, even family, I say, on a Mother's Day. Anything else that is too important to us deprives God of first place in our lives. The only image of God that we need is, in fact, Jesus, whom we're told is the image of the invisible God. We look to Jesus and we see what God is like. And we often hear people say, don't we, I like to think of God as, you fill in the gaps. What they're saying is they're making up their own idea, their own picture of God, and it's usually not one that is consistent with what the Bible tells us about God. And that too is a form of idolatry. The third commandment tells us not to misuse the name of the Lord our God because his name is important. We often use a person's name to indicate their reputation. And we pray in the Lord's Prayer, hallowed be your name, kept holy, honoured. And we sometimes hear the commandment as just telling us that we shouldn't use God's name as a swear word, and indeed we shouldn't do that. But it's more than that, isn't it? Positively, it's as Christians we honour God's name when we speak and we live in ways that point others to him and show his character. Or negatively and sadly, we can dishonour his name when we don't live and don't act in the right way. Because how do others think of God when they look at us? Now let me ask you, which commandment is the only one not mentioned in the New Testament? I won't put you on the spot. If you said the fourth commandment about the Sabbath, though, you'd be right. It actually makes me surprised that there are some who make this one a very legalistic thing, make some demands about exactly how we should use Sunday, or some people Saturday. But the reason given in the commandment is that God rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. But even so, God hasn't stopped working. Jesus said, my Father is always at work, and I too am working. Because he keeps the universe going, and he keeps on at his important business of saving and blessing us. But keeping one day in 7 as a day of rest is for our good. Jesus said that the Sabbath was made for man. But it of course also looks forward to that future rest that God has promised to us. And in the meantime, that commandment is for our well-being, and we thank him for pointing it out to us. And that brings me to the one that is often misunderstood, the one to honour your father and your mother. Is it true at any age? Is it true if they aren't really being worthy of honour and not acting properly? Well, it does tell us, doesn't it, how important to God the family is. It's especially true today when the family's under so much attack. Now, I guess looking around the room for most of us, we are in the age group that is to be honoured rather than the one to give honour. But if our children do that, how blessed we are. How sad it is when older people are ignored or neglected. I read the statistic the other day that, if you can believe it, that it's only about 30% of residents in nursing homes who are ever visited regularly by their family. Terrible statistic, isn't it? Anyway, happy Mother's Day again to all the mothers here. It's a very appropriate day to consider the importance of this commandment, isn't it? And then number 6, you shall not murder. Oh well, we're pretty safe. I doubt there's any murderer in our midst. But there are other implications, aren't there? Think of war, accidents, abortion, euthanasia, research on embryos and so on. There's not time to explore all of those. And of course, even our wider society pays lip service to this commandment, even though it chooses to ignore and to break most of the others. But also, as I mentioned earlier, Jesus clearly widened the meaning of this commandment to include hatred and anger. He told us instead to love our enemies. So it's not just the outward action of murder that's important, but it's the state of our heart that carries hatred and lack of love towards someone else. And then, you shall not commit adultery. Well, here's a humorous aside. I read recently of a printed copy of the Bible known as the Wicked Bible, which was published way back in 1631, and clearly it had not been well proofread because they left out the word not. Thou shalt commit adultery. Well, of course, seriously, sexual intercourse outside of the marriage of one man and one woman is not only a sin against the other person, but a sin against God himself. You remember when King David had sinned in that way, he said to God, against you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight. Because faithfulness is such an integral part of God's character. Faithfulness is what he looks for in his followers. And sadly, that doesn't seem to matter to so many in this day and age. But it does matter to God. Well, nearly there. You shall not steal. Now, I said earlier that concept actually lies behind so many of the other commandments. Taking something that belongs to someone else. Being dissatisfied with what God has given to us. Wanting what has not been given. And the New Testament view, of course, turns it around and says, in need.